just put together this short little presentation to kind of go over just like an introduction to the Shukhov Tower and the architect engineer behind it, Vladimir Shukhov. So can we have the next slide? So who is Shukhov? This is Vladimir Grigorovich Shukhov. He is known as Russia's first engineer. Go to the next slide.
Yeah.
She's Instagramming back there.
Yeah.
So Vladimir Grigorovich Shukhov, born in 1853. That was one of the surprising things when I was learning about him, because I researched constructivist architecture, and that's 1920s, 1930s. And when I found out he was born all the way in the 1850s, that means he was in his elder years when he actually constructed the tower in the 1920s. The reason that he's called the first engineer of Russia is he did all sorts of projects. He did, as this list shows, railway bridges, water towers, lighthouses, storage tanks, steam boilers, pumps, lattice coverings, warship mast mines. Like, he did everything, and his main material was metal, steel. Some fun facts is before Vladimir Shukhov came up with the idea of using round storage tanks for oil, they actually use square ones. It's kind of like what makes Vladimir Shukhov so cool is that he was like the first of first. He came up with the first way to do, cylindrical storage for oil, or what else? He also came up with a way to extract benzene, the oil from something to do with the production of oil. And before that, nobody had come up with it before. Can we have the next one? Do you guys know where this is? So, fun fact is that Shukhov did this. He is known for a lot of these very lightweight, very beautiful steel structures that cover a large space. You have the next slide? Another archival picture. And the next one? So that's from the top view. So that's another interesting thing that when I was learning about Vladimir Shukhov, I knew him from the tower, Shukhovskaya Bashня. But after that, I started reading what other projects he's done, and he's actually done a lot of very key places. So we have the Goon, and go to the next slide. The Metropole Hotel, also the ceiling. The Pushkin Museum, also by him. And Tuvsky Vokzal. So those are just a few of them, like the main ones. All of them are really close. We've probably all been in one of these places before and not even realized it. That was by Shukhov. But then there's a whole list. By all means, that Vladimir Shukhov was definitely a genius, just because you can read through his biography and all the things that come as he was the first to do this, he did this, and the list of projects. And he not only was an engineer, but he was a photographer. Last year there was a really interesting exhibit of his photographs, because he was an avid photographer, and now we have this great archive of photographs from his time period. And that's just one of the things he did. And then he's also a chemist, a physicist, an architect, many things. So the main thing that I want to talk about today was the Shukhov Tower. So the beginning of the Shukhov Tower comes from the All-Russia Industrial Fair in Nizhny Novgorod in 1896. And for this, he created this 32-meter tower, and it was the first hyperbolite tower in the world. And after this, in 1899, 3 years after the fair, he received a patent for this. And since that time, this patent has been used all over the world, has been used in Russia for all the different types of towers. And it doesn't mean that they're all 32. They range in heights, they range in purposes. Some of them are light towers, some of them are water towers. Shukhov Tower was a radio tower and then a TV tower. So, but this was the beginning, and that's kind of always interesting to think about that he did this way back in 1896, and it's still being, this patent is still being used today. Next slide. So the Shukhov Tower. Originally, when he came up with the design for the tower, it was going to be 350 meters. So that would have made it even taller than the Eiffel Tower. But during the time period when he was designing the project, there was a civil war, and so there was a shortage of metal. So because of the economics of it, he had to scale down the tower to 148 meters, which is the one that was actually built. So, and so this was built the project was commissioned 1919, so then it was started 1920, and finished by 1922. But you can imagine in the 1920s, after the revolution, lack of metal, there was no helicopters, no cranes to put this together. I mean, 148 meters. It was definitely kind of a very, very ambitious project. So he came up with a very ingenious way of constructing it from the inside, so from the bottom up. So he built the first section, then in the middle of it construct the second one and lift it up. So the tower kind of grew with telescopic method. So unlike the Eiffel Tower, which was built by cranes, this was all kind of self, with a pulley system, built up. Grew. And a diagram of how all that happened. Another. So during the construction of the tower, there was an accident, a slip-up, where something slipped, and in the process of that, 2 people died. And at that time, there was a lot of pressure on building this tower, because this was supposed to be the tower to spread the communist message. It was going to be a radio tower to help spread Moscow's news as far as possible. And when this happened, Shukhov actually got, threat. They said that, if you don't finish the tower within a certain amount of time and do it right, then you'll be shot. So it's kind of like, after that, he was under so much pressure to complete this tower. His life was literally on the line for it. Next slide. That's Vladimir Shukhov during the process. And then, so it was built. He survived. He lived.
Great.
Can I come?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, maybe.
Ooh, can you move it just a sec to the side?
oh, sorry.
Maybe is it comfortable like this?
Yes. Okay.
So when the Shukhov Tower was built, the reason that it was built at the Shablovskaya area is that this was topographically the highest point in Moscow, so that was very strategic to have a radio tower, to have the most possible reach, to have it on the highest location. And then from that point, there were several of these housing units that were built at the same time. So like now, this is Shablovskaya area where the tower is located. It's not only the tower, but it's also the surrounding neighborhood that kind of grew around it because of that tower there. Next slide. And so you can see at that time how huge this tower was. For the 1920s to build a 148-meter tower was pretty colossal. This is another example of the constructivist architecture that was built at the same time period. With the Donskoy Monastery, with the tower in the background, and one of kind of the arguments for why the Shukhov Tower is such an important part of the city skyline is that before there was all these bell towers of churches and cathedrals, and then the Shukhov Tower kind of complemented that with its location and with its shape and its design. And that's the thing is that the Shukhov Tower, what makes the Shukhov's creations is that they're not only really practical and economical, but they're actually really, really beautiful. picture shows, this is like one of the most like favorite views of photographers is if you have the opportunity to shoot, photograph looking up. And then this picture is by Alexander Radchenko, and this is actually one of the first pictures that I saw of the Shukhov Tower, and from that point I was actually like in love with this tower, in love with, I started learning about constructivism, and so that's why Shukhov to me is a very like personal person who inspired me to do my project. Next picture, so another picture by Alexander Radchenko. And another one. Recently, the Shukhov Tower has been nicknamed Russia's Eiffel Tower. The thing is, everybody knows about, in Paris, you go see the Eiffel Tower, you take pictures with the Eiffel Tower, but not that many foreigners usually know about the Shukhov Tower. Back in February, when there was an announcement that they would demolish the tower, a lot of preservationists and activists started coming up with ways to how to promote this tower, how to explain to the world why this is so special. So one way was to compare it with the Eiffel Tower. How is the Shukhov Tower not any worse? It's actually in many ways better. So I stole this from another person's lecture that I saw. Next picture. So one reason why the Shukhov Tower is really awesome is that from the patent that received in 1899, it has been duplicated around the world in different structures. Even there's some in Japan and Australia. So it's with this one idea of this hyperbolite structure, it's been replicated around the world. That's really cool. Also, it's very economical. Shukhov had to come up with that because of the times, but at the same time, if it was built in its original 350 height compared to the Eiffel Tower at 310, which weighs over 8,000 tons, the tower would have only been 2,000. So even back then it was nice to be economical, but even now everybody wants to save money, and it's a very economical way of building. This is what I was talking about, how like the different methods of working, of constructing the tower. The Shukhov Tower was built without cranes, the telescopic pulley system. And this one I definitely agree with. So not only is like its engineering marvel, but it's also very aesthetically pleasing. Very you can photograph it from any angle, and it just looks really nice, especially from bottom up. And the last one was the fact that it's been used all over. I forget which locations these two are, but few people, when they see these towers, know that that idea actually came from Shukhov. They think, oh, this new modern architect came up with this idea, but actually it all goes back to Russia's first engineer, Vladimir Shukhov. So some of the activists came up with this fun little design of the Shukhov Tower is more awesome than the Eiffel Tower, and for many, many reasons, but those were like the 5 main ones. So what's happening with the tower today? As you can see, the surrounding neighborhood has changed. You can still see the Donskoy Monastery over there, but the contemporary landscape was definitely a lot different. And back in February of this year, the Ministry of Communications, who owns this tower and has owned it for the last 10 years, said that the tower is in a very poor state. There's a lot of corrosion, that there's pieces of metal flying off the tower, and that the tower can like fall down. And it's with the top rural addition, it's now like 160 meters. So that means it has a radius of 160 meters that can fall down and crash on buildings and schools. And they started up this very big campaign of trying to convince people to be afraid of this thing falling. The thing, there's many, many, many reasons why everything that they said was propaganda to get their way. But one thing is that this tower, for the last 30 years hasn't been painted with anti-corrosion, and it's all its lifetime. It's never been restored, so it's never had any maintenance, and it's still standing. So over 90 years old, and it's still standing. The construction and the fact that it's still standing is it's due to the kind of genius of how Shukhov created the tower, that if an element gets weaker, the rest of the tower kind of makes up for it. And it's all this gets very technical and very on the engineering level, but what I've been told and what I've been researching is that the structure, just the way that it's constructed, makes it very, very sturdy, even if it is heavily corroded. So after we heard this news that this tower might be broken, might be dismantled, a lot of different people started conducting tours, explaining about the tower, explaining about the situation, kind of informing the public of what's happening. And this is definitely I've been observing this whole, how people react to constructivist architecture, preservation of old buildings in Moscow. And usually some people care, but most people it's not that important. But with Shukhov Tower, it's a little bit different. For many reasons, it's some people are just nostalgic. People in the neighborhood who live there, they have this view, and they can't imagine that they would not see this tower out of their window. Other people know of it because it was the first radio tower. The symbolism of that. It was also the first TV tower. The design of the Shukhov Tower has popped up in a lot of magazines. It's in architecture books. I mean, it's not like something that's very easy to kind of erase. And so there was a campaign to help promote the tower and help educate the public why we should fight for this tower, why we should, tell the authorities, no, it shouldn't be dismantled. This one. So, hand out leaflets, petitions, gather signatures to tell the authorities that the tower should be saved. Next one. And then there's demonstration at the Arkadia metro station. This is Arkhazor. And so the lecture is called Past and Future. So the future, some things you can't, in activism, you can't just tell people like, don't demolish buildings, this is a bad idea. You also have to then say like, what should be done, what can be done. So already for many years now, there have been different architecture bureaus that have been coming up with possible ideas of restoration. This is just one of them, where it was to create a temporary encasing around the tower. Is working at a height of 160 meters, you can imagine the wind there. So that was their idea behind it, and they had wanted to do also a viewing platform from the top. And like I've seen some videos of people who've been at the top. The view is really amazing. Moscow is really beautiful from an aerial view. So I mean, that seems like a very interesting idea. There's the top view, and there's not only restoring the tower as part of the reconstruction project, but also redeveloping the area. The Shabelska area, like I said, has a lot of other constructivist buildings. It has a lot of galleries, has some cultural institutions, and the current kind of very plausible idea is to create this whole area as a cultural cluster. Moscow doesn't have a lot of these cool places. So there's a way to connect all these institutions, these galleries, and then also there's no Shukhov Museum in Moscow, which kind of seems kind of interesting if he is so significant, if he's built so many things in Moscow that are key, like GUM and Pushkin Museum. Why doesn't he have a museum? So that would be a very logical thing to do. So, and there's some pretty radical concepts as well. But the latest news was that the government said that no, we are not going to demolish the tower. They basically kind of put the fate on hold. The people who are in charge of the tower still say that the tower is in such a dangerous condition that in 2 years it's going to have to be demolished, but we're hoping that it doesn't get to that. And they actually said that international competition should be held to invite international experts, considering that think that for me is really interesting about the towers, that it's like, you don't have to be an engineer to appreciate it, but then once you learn the cool, like, engineering facts, stuff, oh, engineering is kind of neat. So, any other questions?
But also, why isn't there a Shukhov? Like, was there a period where he fell into disfavor, or there's museums for everyone?
Well, there's not a museum for Russian avant-garde art or architecture in Moscow, which kind of is crazy since everybody abroad always goes, oh, I love constructivism. It would be a very logical thing to have a Russian avant-garde museum in Moscow. The closest we have is an avant-garde center, but it's not its own establishment, its own exhibition hall. So it seems like a no-brainer that there should be one. So I hope in the future that's what it would be.